I'm Tim, the brand weaver, and this is Branding for Breweries, the podcast that helps you grow your brewery, build a better brand, and connect with more drinkers. Each week, I'm joined by the brightest minds in the beer world, sharing practical tips to help your brewery stand out and sell more beer. Let's get stuck in. What up, 24-hour party people? 'Tis I, Tim the Brand Weaver, coming to you bright and early this Monday morning, into your eyeballs and earballs. Well, only eyeballs if you're tuning in visually. If not, earballs later on, now or in the future. Yes, I'm talking to you from the past. Get strapped in, boys and girls, because this is another epic episode where I bring you the brightest minds from the brewing world to your screens, earpods, AirPods, to help your brewery thrive and survive. Or survive and thrive and grow and do great things. And today is no exception because I am joined by the dashing Ben. Ben has been collaborating with the wonderful behemoths at We Are Beer. They put together the Future of Craft Beer report based on the UK Grocery Guide. And we're kind of going to be delving into that because it's a beast of a document, boys and girls. I read it and I had to read it 3 or 4 times to get my head around it. I was like, right, best way to get this information over is actually bring Ben in and he can distill the important points for everyone. So with that in mind, let's bring Ben into the studio and we can have a good old chinwag. Ben, hello, mate.
Hello.
How you doing, buddy?
Very well, thank you. Yes. A bit concerned that you've described it as a beast of a document. I had to work really hard at editing it down. So, yeah, but hey, let's get those messages across today.
Exactly. I dread to think what the first draft was like, biblical proportions.
Yeah, university dissertation levels, definitely. Yeah.
I just call it a beast because I'm not overly academic. So I find any readings a challenge from him. Just like, oh, words. Come on, man. Let's do this.
Yeah, I think edit 4, I was at boredom level with it already, so I was hacking away. Yes, yeah.
Dude, but like we say, let's delve into it today and let's give the listeners the highlights, the important stuff that they can really take away and use from this if they're looking to grow in the grocery space.
Sure.
But as always, in a Cilla Black-esque fashion, what's your name, where'd you come from, and how did this all come about? How did the report come about, Ben?
Yeah, certainly. Look, my name is Ben Penrose. I'm a founder of a business called Striqe. Our business is about helping companies sell to retailers, sell to consumers, and this is all based on my background of 20 plus years in food and beverage, working both as a supplier to retailers and as a retailer myself, working in the buying and the commercial functions. I'm a craft beer enthusiast, have been a beer enthusiast for a large part of my adult life, and working sort of in the last few years, just craft has really exploded for me. And I get very excited walking into stores when I see new products on the shelf. And I suppose over a number of years had found myself walking the aisles thinking, oh, why is there more space on the shelf? Oh, what's sour beers doing on the shelf now? I've not seen that before. There's an emergence of fruit-based lagers, double dry hopped IPAs, 8%, 9% beasts on the shelf. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be really interesting if I've got all of these questions, then surely other people in the industry have it. And it'd be grand if I could get the support of somebody to open doors to the buyers and we could have a good old chinwag, a bit like we're doing now, really. But, trying to find out what are their motivations for putting the products onto shelf? What are they trying to achieve? And if I can put that into a format that then the brewers can use, then hopefully everybody gets a better result. The retailer, the brewer, and ultimately the consumer with a better range of beer on the shelf.
Nice summary, love it. So let's start kind of like high level, and I'm sure just through the natural progression of conversation, we'll drill down into some really juicy tidbits. But what would you say is like the current state of play? What have you discovered with craft beer and the UK grocery market? Where are we right now?
Yeah, look, craft beer itself, in terms of total market, total sales has become quite static. If we're rolling back 5, 6, 7 years, the excitement that craft beer brought was consumers aged 25 to 44. This is really important for supermarkets because this is where people start having families, they've got pets, they're spending more money in grocery as opposed to pubs, bars and restaurants sort of thing. So people were looking at it and saying, well, look, if I can put more space into the fixture, I'm going to grow my sales. The size of the sales value per can, per unit is greater than, classic lager and beer. And, for those early days, it was really exciting that the retailers giving more space. As they gave more space, sales grew. But actually what they found is, at the front end, so with our Gen Alphas and our Gen Zs, actually people are coming in with different aspirations and different plans for drinks. That might be tied to functionality of drinks, no or low. And as a result of that, craft beer has become quite static. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because the craft brewers and the very best who are working with the retailers have actually sort of started moving into different spaces in beer. So actually trying to raise the whole beer game, and whether we see that in lager or we see that in stouts or ales, we're all familiar with people who've gone in and now doing that, and still those brands are growing and they're growing very well. So depends. If you're looking at craft beer specifically, we've kind of reached a static point. But for those craft beer brands who are now sort of exposing their styles and their influences to the wider beer fixture, actually there's still a lot of growth there.
Okay. So one thing it would be really interesting to understand is when you say we've gone quite static right now. So say craft beer out of the drinks aisle, just making it has 10% of the aisle space.
Yeah.
You're saying that has stalled, that has remained at 10%. It's not growing beyond. But if you're saying what we're seeing is breweries then diversifying, does that mean they're diversifying beyond the 10%, so they have more shelf take up, or is that diversification still taking place within the 10%, and is it almost like diluting what craft is or has?
Yeah, look, I'll use BrewDog as an example because I think they've done it most prolifically, and I'll use Tesco as a retailer just because I've seen it done the most there. But if you were to walk an aisle at Tesco at the moment, think of your experience today. BrewDog, through paying for their space, have commanded a retail media zone, so they're branded up, and in that space is predominantly BrewDog. So they'll do a mix of craft beer and formats. That's the 440ml cans for trial, then into 4-packs, 8-packs, 12-packs, to give people different reasons for different occasions. But what we know is that BrewDog in the last couple of years have proliferated their range offer, and whether that's Shore Amber Ale, or whether that's Black Heart in stout, or cold beer, and now this year sort of cold beer peach lager and stuff like that. Actually, as you sort of head down the aisle, you find BrewDog appearing in, hey, look, it's in World Lager with Lost Lager, for example. And then if actually you're walking out into the store, very regularly you will find pallet display units or floor standing units with product in it, all branded up by BrewDog. And as a result, BrewDog are firing, growing each of those categories with their contributions to lager, to stout, etc.
Right, I get it. So they're actually looking at the other categories they can sit in and making an offer to go beyond craft beer. So they're spreading the net, I suppose, right?
Yeah, and look, that's that's beneficial for the retailer themselves, because again, by being a premium brand and having those crafty associations, unit per unit, the retailer can earn more. So there's a bigger revenue basket for them. For us as the craft beer industry, by putting BrewDog in different formats out into the store more widely, we can pick up more consumers. And the idea there is that we can actually grow beyond the 25 to 44. So, stout in terms of that area, and amber ales is probably picking up some of the wider end, older than you and I. At the lower end, then the peach lagers, the fruit lagers, some of those juicier IPAs, for example, hopefully picking up some of the younger consumers who have a sweeter tooth or a preference towards a less bitter beer.
Yeah. And so with that in mind, thinking about what the grocery buyer really wants, I know the report mentioned this idea of commercially capable partners.
Mm-hmm.
What is that, and what does it mean for a smaller little indie brewery, and what they need to know about it?
Yeah, look, the beauty of the craft beer buyer is that they are infused and excited. I hadn't met a buyer in my interviews who are not really pleased as punch to be in a role that they're in. So, you know, it's an interesting category. There's lots going on and there's lots of people to engage with and lots of emergent sort of activities happening. Of course, if I'm a brewer, one of the things that I might tick off my success list is getting a national listing. And you know, invariably there's different stages, and that's on trade, then into off trade, and obviously if you can get the big guys, then you know that can be a transformational impact on your business. And of course that's written into law with again Brewdog and the role that they had starting from nothing to then becoming, you know, who they are today. And as a result of that, you know, the buyers really are looking for people who are able to come in and talk as experts. So, you know, let's use an example. If you're coming in as, let's say, Vault City, as one of the leaders in fruit and sour beers, the guys in the buying departments are looking towards them to sort of talk about, well, how are the trends working out in fruit flavors? What products should we be putting in, and how do we get people to try those products and then try through a range? And, you know, if we can do that, how does that fit in with the rest of the range that I've currently got? So how can you connect the dots? How can you introduce one drinker from here to here, or what do we do there? So, you know, that would be one of the elements. And then secondly, it's about having sort of courageous and clear conversations around the economics. I think the buyers recognize that to produce great beer, you know, there are commercial constraints in doing that. But at the same time, there's a realization that up to a certain point, there's only so much price elasticity that you're going to get. So what I mean by that is the amount of demand drops away as the price of the beer gets higher. And of course, versus a bottle shop or an independent retailer, the credibility of the beer becomes a little bit, you know, how much are people prepared to pay when they're also buying a basket full of groceries and spending, you know, their money on the shop sort of thing. So the buyers are really looking for people to come in with an understanding, and therefore then a willingness to work with them to make that happen.
To me, it sounds like a bit of a dark picture for an indie brewery. You're already like super busy. Like, what we have to like, we've got to coach and mentor these buyers. We've got to give them the education or the extra bits to help sell the beer. But I suppose it's, if you're confident in your product, you know what you're delivering and how you're doing it. It should, I would hope, come quite naturally. Is that the idea, or do they have to, what's the approach?
Well, you're right, and it's. There's effectively a bandwidth that you're operating in, and you know, confidence is a great thing, and I always recommend in my selling style to say, look, put an opportunity on the table. So how many cans of beer do you expect to sell a week? How many stores do you want to sell it in? And therefore, you know, what's the opportunity for you and for the retailer? But think about, you know, again, most of the retailers now have a multi-buy offer in the fixture, so you know, it's trial. And if you're a bit of a beer geek like I am, then, you know, the new range comes in and you plow fully into it. You're like, right, me and my friends, we're going to get all 12 beers that have come out new, and we're going to try those over the next couple of sessions that we're sat down drinking beer. Now, if you took that as your initial signal of demand, you might be producing heaps of stock because of that. But of course, there's all this excitement at the front end. And then if the beer is sort of exciting and continue to be valued by the consumers, you might expect a certain level of demand. If it's not something that's kind of hit the zeitgeist, then you might expect a lower level of demand. And then some people might be saying, well, look, I want to buy that style into regular promotions, and then you hit a higher level of demand. And so the buyer is trying to navigate that with you and find a total performance for their beer fixture. And so they might be saying to you, look, hey, we've done really well. It's flying in the first 3 or 4 weeks. This is what our ongoing forecast is going to look like. Imagine you're the supplier and you haven't given that sort of success any consideration in mind. Have you got the cans available to can it? Have you got the capacity available? Do a range review in October. Are you available to meet the demand and the capacity coming into Christmas? You know, all of those sort of things. And so look, the buyers aren't trying to take you for a ride. The buyers are just trying to make the product available for the customer, and they're trying to give as much information back to the brewers to help make that happen.
Yeah, so they've got their boxes to tick. They know what they need to look for, and I suppose it's more about collaboration, isn't it? You need to get on the same wavelength with your buyers to know this is what's going to be coming up. We've already thought about this, so this is the plan of attack.
Yeah, and look, some of the suppliers that I've spoken to, and even some of the buyers in the earlier days were sort of like, well, look, somebody got here, they say, look, this is the greatest beer on the planet. I go, yeah, it tastes excellent, I love it. And they're like, well, as soon as we put it on the shelf, that's the job done. And it's kind of like, well, actually, no, that's not the job done. The product needs to be promoted so people can, when you're in a supermarket, you're looking for a promotion. It's your access point to trying something new. There might be retail media that you can buy to make people interested. That might be coupons. That might be a shelf marker or an aisle fin. That might be media on the website. It could be sampling or something like that. So, it's not just getting the beer to the warehouse and then getting it distributed to all the stores. I mean, that's the great first order where everybody gets excited by the big number. But for me, when I work with suppliers, that's like, great, job done. Now the job is to get out and sell that beer to your consumers.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really valid point. And it keeps on popping up a lot with various guests that I have here. Like, everyone has that kind of that pinnacle moment where we've achieved this. It's like, yeah, but almost that's like the top of the first mountain. Now you've got to like get up there and make everyone aware that you have achieved this and it's now accessible or available. It's on this platform or it's on this store. So it's a good drum to keep on banging for every brewery out there.
Yeah, I mean, look, to use the analogy, I describe it like you've got to the top of the mountain and now you're navigating the cliff edge, and if any wrong slip and you've fallen into the ravine sort of thing. So it's that's yeah.
So you talked about kind of like the 3 for 4 deals, and then you've got 440s, 330s, various packs and things. Like, what have you seen, and what does the report highlight in terms of like the most successful ways to get into like grocery placement to secure that first listing before you start the treacherous walk across the cliff edge?
Yeah, well, look, sort of take us right back to the beginning of our conversation. Initially, if you went into a craft beer fixture in a grocer, it was 440 and 330ml cans, and they were all in a mixed variety, and you would buy either certain cans that were on promotion independently. Then the grocers all kind of cottoned on to, well, look, if we can offer a multi-buy, we can drive up total basket spend. We can emulate what we see in big pack beer. And if you think about lager, it's 12 packs, it's 14s, it's 18s, it's 20s, but we can do that with 3 or 4 units. And then as they've given over more space, by giving over more space in the fixture, they're then able to meet different occasions. So actually, a 4-pack on a 330ml is perhaps a more interesting sort of way to buy into a grocery concept than actually mix and matching 440mls, because they're different drinks occasions, right? A 440ml might be a single treat during the week, or it might be a bit of a session with your friends and you're trying out the different beers. But a 4-pack in a 330ml could be like, well, this is just a couple of cans for refreshment at the weekend, or that's like my beer of an evening, that's my treat sort of thing. What the retailer is always trying to do is they're saying, well, look, let's meet every occasion. So a 4-pack then becomes an 8-pack, and an 8-pack again is sort of at that pricing point that matches to what the consumer thinks about beer. And then more recently, what we've seen is people moving from 8-packs to 12-packs. But of course, every time you go up the pack, there's an expectation of a reward, bigger pack, better value, and therefore the unit cost of that product drops. And the biggest challenge for most businesses is, do I have the capacity and the capability to give better value for giving more beer away? And actually, that's quite difficult because there's more cardboard in a box. There's more cans to produce. There's, and of course, there should be economies of scale, but sometimes that doesn't always stack up. So what we find is the guys with the capabilities, and perhaps this is where sort of, the Camdens of the world, or the Beaver Towns, where they've now got the backing of the big guys behind them, they can go into those big multi-pack formats because they're humping them down a line at speed, all automated. was actually with the other craft guys, actually getting to a 4-pack is probably the nirvana, because you get the trade-off between the better economies of scale, but now you've got to put it in a cardboard box, which adds cost to your products. So.
Yeah, I can definitely see how you can track like growth of brewery alongside what's easy to deliver or what's beneficial to deliver. It makes perfect sense. So would you say like the aspirational is the 4-pack 330, but they should be going in with a 440 to kind of get in that sampling range and justify themselves? What's been the most successful route in?
Yeah, I mean, look, the buyers traditionally are giving over the space in the 440 mil for trial. But the challenge with that is you're kind of constrained by the role of your brand within the total range. So does your product stack up at a 4 for free level? So somebody's always going to be, 90% of the people will buy it at that multi-buy promotion. If I'm getting one, I might as well get 4, sort of thing. And look, that's been confirmed by the buyers and by the data that I've seen. So that's always really the first route in, and then it's almost, if you can be one of those top tier products, then you get to have the conversation with the buyer as to, well, look, how can I now move this into a more regular format for you? How can we grow the consumption of our brand? And Northern Monk's been a great example of that in recent years. You've gone from faith in 440 ml cans to now 4-packs. Northern Monk have got 3 or 4 variants in 4-packs at Tesco, Sainsbury's, etc. And exactly that's how you then sort of grow the frequency of consumption. You can now play across 2 different promotions. So you can put you don't necessarily have to be in a multi-buy at a 4-pack, but you might high-low your promotional offers. And of course, then that just grows the number of times that somebody's consuming the product, grows total share of your sales as a brand in the retailer.
Nice. So if I know the report breaks down kind of the different buyers into 5 different personas, or like the type,
that's
I
correct.
suppose. From the research, like which ones offer the biggest growth for indie brewers? Like which ones should they be focusing on to try and, well, justify, yep, my 440 is worth it. It's going to be on the shelf because it appeals to this kind of drinker.
Yeah, I mean, look, when we did the research with the buyers, we took 3 lenses, and that's dictated in the report. But we used the good beer drinker, which is what you referenced to, then the commercial lens, which is pretty much what we've just discussed, and we also sort of looked at macro trends, which came from the Horizons report by We Are Beer. But the good beer drinker is really interesting because actually it forces a framework for you to think about the consumers and how they are. And look, it's good beer because it's wider than just craft beer, but presenting that to the craft beer buyers, they were kind of like, oh, I hadn't connected the dots in that way somewhat. So, it led to some really interesting conversations. And you're right, there's 5 styles. And, if you were looking at pleasure seekers is the biggest share of consumers, and they're at 34% of the total. And we presented a grid to the buyers and sort of said, look, here are the constraints and the conditions at which the pleasure seekers, operate. Here are the brands that they tend to like. What would you do? And these were the conversations we had. Now, a similar end, I've described myself already as a beer geek. Now, a beer geek makes up 16%. Now, we're fascinated with finding the new style of beer, or it needs another tick in the box for Untapped, sort of thing. That's me. That's what I like to do. So actually, if I'm looking for that, then I want regular change in the fixture so that I can keep ticking off the boxes. But a pleasure seeker, for example, will be looking to connect with other people. They'll be using beer as part of their social sort of communion. And therefore, as a beer geek, I might be looking for a 440 ml can, and I wanted that to change regularly. Whereas a pleasure seeker might be looking for a 4-pack or an 8-pack, which they can then take to a friend's house, share with them, and do something with that. And each of the different types effectively requires a different concentration. So, I was really surprised when I was looking through the report. Actually, there's people there that are solely driven by the promotion, and they're always looking for the deal. So, but they're never looking for it in singles. They're always looking at it in large packs. And generally these are, consumers who are going out on the weekend and meeting up with friends and doing that stuff. So you can imagine, again, as a buyer, actually, who's buying the shop and the beer during the week might be different from the person who's coming in the weekend. So, they're kind of like trying to go, oh, well, that's my lens commercially, that's my lens consumer. And actually the consumer might be different. So, for fear of upsetting, people, but using a traditional heterosexual relationship, the majority of the shop is still undertaken by the woman in the household. So actually, when you're buying that beer for your husband, partner, etc., your confidence in buying the beer might lead you towards, well, actually, I know they like brand X, Y, and Z, and that's on promotion, I'll buy that. Whereas if I'm going in on a Saturday ahead of going to take a few beers around to a mate's house, I might be going, oh, well, I haven't drunk that. I really like that one. And that's a good one to sort of, I know he or she likes that. So you can see how, the beer consumption in our household would be very different if you're looking at a Nectar card or Tesco Club card, for example.
It just feels like there's like lots of, like we call them lenses and considerations. But if you were working with an indie brewer and they kind of go, we confidently know who we are and the kind of beer that we create, how do they take that information to go, well, actually, yeah, I can see we apply to the pleasure seekers. So we're going to go in and pitch the idea of the 4-pack to this person. But, oh, no, hang on. It's not the pleasure seeker who's going shopping. It's their partner. Like, how do we win them over? How do you navigate this? Let's go back to the cliff edge analogy. Be our Sherpa, Ben. Help us to get across the cliff edge. Like, how do you interpret this information and do something good with it?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've got the knees to be a Sherpa anymore, but yeah, look, it's a really difficult thing, and I think to follow the path, and I was actually having a conversation with an independent brewer last week who were pitching to a large national retailer, and actually we were sort of, what were we trying to do? Well, number one actually is, let's make our points really clear and really narrow. Now, like, when we're super excited about presenting to somebody, we have a tendency to put everything on the table, like trim all that back. Once we've had our 5 minutes introduction and 5 minutes for the buyer to turn up late and 10 minutes at the end to talk about next steps, actually, there's probably a window of 5 to 10 minutes to actually talk about your product and your brand. So hero that first, okay? Craft beer buyers are looking for something exciting, high quality, and they know, as the beer geeks and some of the other people who are coming in, whether that's curious casuals and stuff like that, then everybody wants different things from that fixture. So going in and being really clear about who you are and what you represent is a great way to start a conversation. Then walking into a fixture and looking at the products on the shelf, asking yourself, is my product the same? Do I have any evidence to suggest that my product is better, or is my product different? And look, I'll use Vault City as an example, but they came in initially and sort of said, look, we're doing fruit sour beers here, and they've started, and 18 months later, you walk into, now you've got 3 or 4 options on the shelf, and I'm sure as that trend continues, that will become 6, or it'll become 4 packs from some of the earlier stuff that they've done and things like that. And then finally, it's kind of what's in the fixture that should be there, what's not in the fixture, sorry, that should be there. And that could be, well, I mean, all sorts of things. That could be, that will be the brewer's intent and what they represent, but really working hard to convey the difference. And that's the conversation we were having last week. I'm not going to give it away, but there was a point in that retailer's fixture which they weren't covered by what that brewer had to offer, and therefore it was like, major on that, be really clear, because the buyer is trying to do all of these different lenses, all of that noise, and you just have to like zone in and go, right, this is what I'm giving you. You do not have that right now. Win with me. And look, let's try that in X number of stores. Let's do that in these pack formats, so maybe that's can size or total. And then, actually, and they were really good about this. So we're like, look, go in there and have a conversation. You don't want 1 product, you don't want 2, you actually want 3, because if you're just 1 can and 1 brand in a fixture where there's a heap of cans, you'll get lost. So actually, like, let's bring some range, let's get credible, and then that's how you start building the relationship, because the consumer walks in and they go, oh, Tim's brand, Tim's Beers has got 1, 2, 3. Okay, they've got an IPA, an APA, and let's a Helles Lager or something like that. We know that they've got good beer width, they've got credibility, they're in the promotional offer. Good. What a way to start. And you'll then find, if you had 3 or 4 beers in the fixture, well, what are the ones that people most identify with? And hopefully they'll be the ones that people identify with in the on-trade or something like that, or other off-trade locations.
And then would that give the fuel to go, well, this one was sold really well, so let's have a conversation about the 4-pack kind of thing. So that's the natural progression.
Yeah, and again, I think Vocation is a great example of that. Way back in the day, Life and Death was a 330ml can, then it became a 440ml can in the mix. Then the 330 moved into a 4-pack. In some retailers, in some of the larger stores, you can find it in a bigger pack. And then Vocation just kind of keeps spinning it. So now it's a buy 2 for 10, or they have a 4-pack on offer every other period at £7.50 down to £5 or something like that. So it's a combination of driving trial, reminding the consumer that you're there, and accepting that there are other brands and there will be other commercial strategies at play. And how do you continue to sort of be relevant to the buyer and give your brand the best chance of selling?
I've got 2 questions that come out of that, which I think, by the way, that was golden. I love that idea of what you need to get into that conversation. But from your past experience, like, how many breweries are rocking up to a chat with a buyer with that kind of information versus, it's a nice beer, isn't it?
Look, I think, there's a lot of people rolling up with, this is the best beer that you'll have ever tasted. And I guess when you've drunk over 1,000 different beers from suppliers, your taste buds have become either deadened by the velocity of product coming at you, or actually you have your own styles. And there was a great conversation I was having with one of the retailers, and they said, clearly the person in here before me didn't like craft beer because we had 3 pineapple IPAs in our range. And their range was quite a limited range of IPAs, and therefore it was kind of like, the buyer was actually doing what the buyer wanted, which is a bad thing. As a buyer, yes, of course, you want to put products out there that you're proud of, and enjoy, because you're getting a discount when you buy it as an employee of the retailer, so you get to enjoy a bit more beer for free. But with that in mind, yes, there are so many people rolling in just going, hey, we've got the best beer. This is the world's best IPA. It's kind of like, yeah, come on. I've already seen 10 of the world's best IPA this year. What's the difference? So yeah. And like I say, actually, most people are rolling in unprepared, and they're coming in with like 30 or 40 slides to show the buyer, and expecting to get through the content and leave the messages clear to the buyer over the course of, a 40-minute meeting or something like that, and it just misses the mark. So, a lot of people fail because of not necessarily being prepared, but being prepared to cut away and get to the points really quickly.
So it does sound like there's a big opportunity for breweries, like, to do it better in terms of like having those initial conversations with buyers, with a bit of research, a bit of understanding of their market, and being able to leverage the right data to go, there is a place for this beer, right? It's not just because it's the best IPA, but it's because this IPA features X, Y, and Z, or in collaboration with this, and you don't have anything like that.
Absolutely. And I always go back to sort of how I propose that you sell, and I'm classically trained, which meant you would leave your commercials to the very end of a presentation, and you would want to then share with everybody your manufacturing or your story or stuff like that. When I became a buyer, I would sit in a meeting and spend the whole meeting going, is this worth my time? What am I trying to get from each of the slides that you're presenting to me? And therefore, when we got to the end, it was either a bit of disappointment because I'd been hanging out there and engaging, or it would be, oh, well, that's a nice surprise. But more often than not, it would be like, actually, I'd get to the end, and then I would have taken from every slide, because I'd been looking at it cynically and ready to be challenging, with like, okay, well, look, here's something I've picked out of your presentation that upsets me. So let's talk about that instead of let's talk about the opportunity, you know? So I always say, put the opportunity on the table first. And if you've got an opportunity, then people start talking about that. So, you know, you go into a grocer, you want 300 stores, you want 3 lines, you're going to sell 4 units per store per week. How much does that mean in total pounds? And then you put that right up front. And if I'm a buyer and you've presented me with a £1.5 million opportunity, even if you don't know how much I sell as a retailer, you know, what the total market value is, I, as a retail buyer, know that you're giving that some thought as to what you think is achievable here. And we can have a much more positive and useful conversation.
Yeah, it's going in with the business mindset over the brewer mindset, isn't it, in that respect?
Unfortunately, it is. Yeah. And you know, what I don't think it's brewing only. I mean, soft drinks, it's a number of categories that I've played in with my clients, but actually most of the time when I turn up to a Tesco or a Sainsbury's account, people go, I'm not making any money. And you say, well, how are you not making any money? And they say, well, look, we went in and we gave them the best price that we could. And then cost of sales increased it, and then, you know, actually it was a bad wheat harvest or grain, and, you know, hops had a bad year, and suddenly, you know, I'm 50% more expensive than I was when I presented that, but I now can't afford to lose the listing, so now I can't go back and have a difficult conversation. So again, it's being upfront with the buyers and sort of saying, look, this is the thinking as to where we got to on the price, this is where we think the room is for the consumer to pay. We're prepared to invest in to drive volume, but, you know, here are some of the headwinds that perhaps we're facing into. So let's find a price that works for us both. And that's really difficult.
100%. And that would remind me, in the report you talk about, was it on-trade being the brand builder, off-trade being the sales lever, wherever you're listening from. You pick which way to say it. How's it best to connect the two, I suppose, and make the best of both scenarios?
Look, COVID's, like so many things in our life, has played a real severing act in what it was. Historically, you would go out, you would launch your products into the on-trade, you would grow your on-trade distribution, and then you would launch into the off-trade, knowing that there were bums on seats or feet on the floor walking in and looking for your product. And invariably, you had a great experience in the on-trade, you know, the energy, the communion, the excitement of being there, and that really built into the brand. But actually, post-COVID, with cost of living crisis, you know, people feeling the pressure and all of the strain that the on-trade and hospitality has had, actually, if I walk into a bar and I spend £8.50 on a pint of beer, unless that beer's phenomenal and, you know, really, you know, I've enjoyed the experience, I'm probably walking out of the on-trade feeling less infused by that product than I am. So actually what we see now is the space given over in grocers, the thought that goes into the brand building and the assortment that the retailers are putting there. A lot of people are actually discovering new beers and new things in the off-trade. And so, you know, I mean, in the report, we try not to give a definitive answer because it will differ dependent on like how many on-trade outlets you can get into, who your relationships are with. Are you launching the brand nationally, regionally, into the off-trade and stuff like that? But, you know, a great example used recently, not Jubel, but Tiny Rebel launched Rebel IPA in the on-trade and the off-trade at the same time. It was their first IPA that they'd launched as a brand. Quite a move, and then they've got, right, we're in Fuller's, we're in so-and-so nationwide rate or regional brewers, and we're launching into Sainsbury's with a 4-pack, and we're launching into Tesco with a 440ml, and we're all doing this. And then what they did is they tied the on-trade in with the off-trade launches, and so that it then, you know, effectively they could grow the capacity, they could double or triple their effect. And if I tried it in the on-trade, then I would take that into the off-trade and buy it in the grocer. Or if I tried it in the off-trade and I walk into a pub, then there's a good chance that I don't need to ask the barman, oh, what is a Rebel IPA? Because I've already done that. And interestingly, somebody like Jubel, who are one of the, you know, heroes at the moment in terms of craft or certainly forward-thinking beer, you know, those guys, they're out, you know, every bar that's near to a Tesco Express where they're listed, they're out there trying to get that listing in the bar. And then when they're in the bar and they've got the listing, they're doing sampling. And guess what? When they do their sampling, they say, hey, look, the bar's here. This pub supports us, but if you're ever in need of it in a grocer, we're also in Tesco and there's one just around the corner. So when you're heading home and you just want to nip in the Express and get your pizza for going home, then you can get a 4-pack or some singles of Jubel. So, again, there's a variety of ways that you can kind of leverage that.
Yeah, it makes sense. Both platforms can be leveraged to benefit the other one in certain ways, can't they? But equally, yeah, there's lots of conversations about the other indie, the pubs, and going, yeah, but we want something special. We can't charge £7. Then you're giving away a 4-pack for £7 in the store just down the road. So it's a juggling act for sure.
And it is, and that's really difficult. But again, actually, the answer in that is and you have to be really like a really narrow focus. And I'm not suggesting that there's some independent, free houses that are great at doing this or craft tap rooms and stuff. But actually, by having products more available in the mine's capacity, the reality is there are more consumers to drink the beer and there's more opportunity to do that. So, in my mind, it really does work both ways. And I've seen that in many categories, because the answer is very simple. If you have a single product in a simple location, there's only so many people who know what that product is and appreciate it. If you can keep putting more products into more people's lives, there's a much better chance that there's more consumers out there to drink.
Yeah, it's a numbers game at the end of the day, isn't it? More places, more eyes, more chance of sales. It's standard.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's a report on good beer. So again, have to be very careful about how people choose to determine what is what. But I think Madri, whether you determine that as a good beer or not, is a great example of right distribution, right marketing inputs, creating a brand and a fearless interpretation of that, whether it's truly Spanish or not, obviously. But actually, that brand's now worth hundreds of millions of pounds. And of course, Molson Coors can do that by the nature of who they are and their routes to market. But somebody still had to go away and continue to place that message down in front of every consumer. And that's, it's a lesson to be learned in terms of making it happen.
So if we were to try and put a bow on this now, Ben, which is challenging because it's as I said, it's a big document, but this has actually gone a really long way to help expand and like double down on some areas. If a brewer was going like, what's the key thing I need to be knowing right now if I want to try and get up in those shelves? I want to be part of the grocery market, and I don't have time to go through the report. Like, what's the big takeaway for them?
Well, look, there's an executive summary, and there are effectively, four key themes, and then we break those down into some deeper ones. But look, differentiation and credibility is really important. So if you've got something that the buyer doesn't have in the range, and you've got proof points that consumers love and adore it, and you think that it adds something to their range and you can communicate that, then you should definitely be doing that. That should be a central part of what you're taking to the buyers. Understand that this cohort of 25 to 44 is moving. So now it's more looking like 35 to 44. And so the buyers are looking for, well, how do I fill the gap on the 25 to 35, where those new households, those new families are coming in? Or is there anything I can do to prolong the spend? Because actually, people in their late 50s are more likely to have empty nests, they're more likely to have higher disposable income, and they're still continuing to, enjoy a drink, albeit maybe with a little bit low and no. And that sort of goes back to differentiation. So now functionality, whether you're a mid ABV beer or a low ABV, again, these are all bits that can be played out when presenting to the buyers. And then finally, just making sure that you have the capabilities to deliver. So don't walk into a retailer making a promise about what you think you can do. These are guys who've got multi-million-pound supply chains. They've got forecasts. They've got expectations. Take it simple. Take it easy. Ask for help. but they will give the help on the basis that you're bringing something new and exciting to their category.
Beautiful. Love it, Vince. Thank you, mate. So I think this brings us to a natural closure to our conversation. But if people haven't had an opportunity to read the report, they want to get into the nitty gritty, they want to have a chat with you, Ben, where can they find the report and where can they find you?
Yeah, certainly. My email address is ben@striqe.co.uk. That is S for sales, T for team management, R for retail, I for insight, Q for Q-commerce, and E for e-commerce. And I'm also available on LinkedIn as Ben Striqe, and there will be a website coming soon where we'll be providing some commercial capability training. In the meantime, yeah, just drop me an email or via yourself, Tim, and happy to pass on that report. The guys at We Are Beer also have the report available, so Greg Wells or any of his team can do that. And then finally, if you're interested in sort of getting any more, then happy to do some work around how we sell as Striqe, or doing some meeting preparation and some presentation coaching. These are all services that we can provide.
Superb, mate. Well, Ben, nothing left for me to say, but thank you for your time this morning, mate. This has been awesome. Like, there's so much good stuff in there. People even in the comments have gone, insightful stuff, Ben. So you're lucking out today, mate. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. And hopefully the next time somebody walks into a grocer, they'll have their own points of view and they'll see that stuff coming together. So thank you.
Wicked stuff, Ben. Everyone who's spent the time giving me your eyeballs, earballs, and listening holes, as always, you rock, and I'll see you on the other side, people. Rock on. That's a wrap on this week's episode of Branding for Breweries. If you got something great from it, hit follow, like, and subscribe on your favorite streaming app. Or even better, leave a review, share it with your brewery pals, or get in touch, because I want to chat to you. Rock on!